What if I told you that the very concept of childhood in the modern sense of the word simply did not exist for the Scandinavians of the 8th century? From the very first days of a child's life, they were prepared not for games and entertainment, but for the harsh struggle for the right to breathe, eat, and defend their kin. In this world, weakness was not just a flaw, but a death sentence that nature and enemies carried out without delay. Watch the video to the end to find out how the ancient Scandinavians tempered the character of their heirs, turning them into fearless warriors and resilient mothers capable of surviving where others would have perished. What if I told you that everything you believed about parental love took a completely different form 1,000 years ago? In the harsh conditions of the Scandinavian North, the arrival of a new person was not only a joy, but also a huge challenge for the entire community. Resources were extremely limited, and every new mouth had to prove its right to exist literally from its first breath. The decision on whether the child would live was made by the head of the family, and this decision was not subject to discussion or criticism by others. He carefully examined the newborn, assessing its physical condition, health, and absence of visible defects. If the baby seemed weak or sick, it might not be accepted into the family, as in those conditions, it was doomed to a long life of suffering. This may seem cruel to modern people, but for the people of that era, it was a harsh necessity for the survival of the entire clan. They believed that a weak member of the community would endanger everyone else, taking away food and strength without contributing anything useful. This attitude shaped a cult of physical strength and health in society, which permeated their entire culture. After the father recognized the child, an important ritual of sprinkling with water was performed, which confirmed the status of the new family member. From that moment on, the child received the protection of the clan, the right to inheritance, and a name that often carried a deep meaning. The name was not chosen at random, but with the aim of passing on to the newborn the strength and luck of one of the glorious ancestors. It was believed that along with the name, a part of the soul and luck of the deceased relative was transferred to the person, which placed a huge responsibility on them. The child grew up with the awareness that they were not just an individual, but a link in a long chain of generations. They had to not disgrace the memory of their ancestor, and if lucky, surpass them in glory and valor. Mothers played a huge role during this period, not only feeding their children, but also laying the foundations for their future character. It was from their mothers that children heard their first stories about gods, heroes, and monsters, which shaped their view of the world. These stories were not bedtime tales, but served as the first lessons in morality, honor, and proper behavior. Viking women themselves were strong and independent, and they passed these qualities on to their daughters and sons. They taught their children to be proud, not to tolerate insults, and to always respond to an insult with an insult. In a home where the mistress could run the household herself in her husband's absence, children saw an example of confidence and determination.
It guides us in battle.
Early education was not strictly divided into male and female, as survival required universal skills. Both boys and girls learned to be attentive, cautious, and observant. They quickly learned that the world around them was full of dangers, and that safety depended solely on their own actions.
What is this symbol?
It means journey. See, it matches the pattern here.
Even at this age, they understood that family and kin were the only reliable support in life. Loyalty to one's own was an absolute value that was absorbed with their mother's milk. Betrayal of the family was considered the most terrible crime, which could not be atoned for by anything. Thus began the journey of the little Viking, a journey on which he would become part of the legendary history of his people. Their childhood was not a time of carefree fun, but a time of intense preparation for great achievements. We would love to hear your opinion. What do you think about the harsh pragmatism of ancient people? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the Scandinavians used frost for education? The Scandinavian climate did not forgive mistakes, and cold was a constant companion to humans for most of the year. Therefore, one of the main tasks of education was to adapt the body to low temperatures. Children were not wrapped in multiple layers of clothing, as is customary today, to protect them from every draft. On the contrary, their clothing was minimal and functional, allowing the body to breathe and get used to the cold. It was believed that excessive warmth made the body weak and susceptible to disease, which was unacceptable for a future warrior. From an early age, children spent a lot of time outdoors, regardless of the weather or season. They played in the wind, rain, and snow, which naturally strengthened their immune systems. The house served only as a shelter for sleep and food, while real life took place outside, under the open sky. Bathing in cold water was not an extreme pastime, but a normal, hygienic, and hardening procedure. Immersion in an icy river or fjord taught them to overcome physical discomfort and control their body's reactions. This ability to remain calm when the body screams from the cold was very useful to them in future sea voyages. In Viking dwellings, longhouses, the temperature was also far from modern room temperature. The hearth burned in the center, but the corners of the house were often freezing, and drafts were common. They had to sleep under skins, warming themselves with their own body heat and that of their neighbors, which was also part of the hardening process. Cold was not perceived as an enemy, but as an inevitable condition of existence with which one must learn to coexist. Parents did not pity their children if they complained of cold hands or feet. They explained to them that the cold only tested their endurance and weeded out the weak, unworthy of life. This attitude shaped a special perception of physical sensations, where discomfort became mere background noise. A person accustomed to the piercing wind since childhood could stand watch on a dracker for hours without losing concentration. This gave the Vikings a huge advantage over peoples living in milder climates. Winter activities such as skiing were not a sport, but a vital means of transportation. Children learned to glide across the snow as early as they learned to walk, which made them mobile in deep snow. The ability to quickly cover long distances in winter was the key to successful hunting and safety. The entire education system was based on the principle that the body should be an instrument ready for any challenge. Hardening was the foundation on which combat training and endurance were later built. Without this foundation, no warrior could survive long marches and harsh battles. The ability to endure the cold became one of the distinctive features of the northern peoples who entered into legend. Do you think such hardening would help modern children become healthier? In the next chapter, you will learn what mental shield helped them not to fear death. Want to know a secret that will change your idea of fearlessness? The Vikings had a unique worldview that completely removed the fear of the unknown future from a person. The central concept in their worldview was fate, which was spun by the Norns and could not be changed by anyone, not even the gods. From an early age, children were taught that the day of their death was already determined at the moment of their birth. This knowledge was not meant to cause despondency or passivity. On the contrary, it gave them incredible freedom. If you cannot avoid death, then you do not need to worry about it, but only about how you will meet your end. This philosophy, known as fatalism, made warriors incredibly brave in battle, because they knew that if their time had not come, the arrow would fly past them. And if their time had come, no armor and no caution could save them from their destiny. The main goal in life was not to prolong it, but to fill it with glorious deeds and honorable behavior. Children were told sagas about heroes who laughed in the face of death and died with weapons in their hands, going to Valhalla. These stories were not just entertainment, but a powerful pedagogical tool that shaped life guidelines. The fear of appearing cowardly was much stronger than the fear of physical pain or death. The concept of luck occupied a special place, as it was considered a real force that was inherited or earned through deeds. A person with strong luck could lead others, and others were drawn to him. Education was aimed at strengthening this inner strength of spirit and not losing it through unworthy deeds. In this world, there was no place for self-pity or reflection on the injustice of the universe. Everything that happened was taken for granted, as part of a pattern woven by the Norns. Children were taught to accept the blows of fate stoically, without complaining or blaming the gods. This mindset allowed the Vikings to keep their wits about them in the most dire situations, where others would break down. They could act calmly and deliberately when chaos and death reigned around them. Psychological training was no less important than physical strength or sword skills. They believed that glory was the only thing that remained after a person's death and lived on forever in the memory of their descendants. The pursuit of good fame was the main motivator for performing feats and overcoming difficulties. Even a child understood that his actions today would become part of his family's history tomorrow. It was this belief in the inevitability of fate that made them such dangerous opponents and such reliable comrades. It is very interesting to consider whether you could live with such complete acceptance of your fate. Please like this if you found this philosophy interesting. What if everything you were taught about children's games is outdated? For young Scandinavians, play was never a waste of time or a way to simply burn off energy. Every game, every competition had a hidden meaning and prepared them for the real challenges of adult life. The games were rough, physical, and often dangerous, but that was exactly what was needed. One of the most popular games was a ball and bat game reminiscent of modern field hockey, but without safety rules. Participants could use force, push, knock opponents off their feet, and it was not considered a violation. Winning such a game required not only agility, but also the ability to take a hit and work as a team. Wrestling was another mandatory element of education in which all boys and young men participated. In fights, they learned to feel balance, use their opponent's weight, and find weak spots. These were the first lessons in close combat, where muscle memory and combat reflexes were formed. Swimming was also not entertainment, but a competition of endurance and strength of spirit. Competitions were often held to see who could stay underwater the longest, or who could drown their opponent by holding them down. Such games taught them not to panic when oxygen was scarce and to fight to the last in the water. Children often imitated adult activities by building fortifications, setting up ambushes, and conducting toy raids. They learned tactics, role distribution, and coordination of actions in a group. Leadership qualities were manifested in such backyard battles where future leaders stood out. Toys were often miniature copies of weapons, wooden swords, small bows, and hatchets. Children became accustomed to the shape and weight of weapons, learning how to hold them correctly and strike blows. The transition from wooden swords to steel ones was smooth and natural.
I pinned you both.
There were no referees in these games to stop the fight because of a broken nose or bruise. The children themselves regulated the level of aggression, learning to understand the limits of what was permissible and to be responsible for their actions. Complaining to adults about pain or hurt feelings was considered a shameful display of weakness. Adults encourage a competitive spirit by watching the games and praising the most agile and courageous players. Praise from a father or grandfather for a successful move in a fight was the best reward. This motivated children to constantly improve and strive to be the best among their peers.
Not for gold, but for glory.
The system of games was designed to eliminate fear of physical contact and pain. A child who had gone through such harsh games did not freeze at the sight of real danger. He already knew the taste of blood on his lips and knew that it was not the end of the world. The games of the Vikings were a mirror of their lives, bright, fierce, and full of struggle. Do you think modern children need such harsh games to strengthen their character? In the next chapter, you will learn how ordinary work turned them into athletes. The Vikings' physical strength was not the result of special training, but of hard daily labor. In a society where there were no machines or mechanisms, absolutely everything was done by hand, and children's hands were put to work at a very early age. The concept of idleness simply did not exist. Everyone had to make a significant contribution to the well-being of the family. From an early age, children understood that their survival and sustenance depended directly on their own productivity and willingness to work. From an early age, boys helped their fathers gather firewood, which required tremendous endurance and strength. Working with a heavy axe developed the muscles of the shoulder girdle, back and arms, forming the very crushing blow that would later come in handy in battle. Constantly carrying heavy loads, logs and stones for construction, strengthened the young man's legs and spine. Gradually, such exertion transformed yesterday's child into a powerful and enduring man. Agricultural work also required tremendous physical effort, especially on the rocky Scandinavian soil. Digging the earth, caring for large livestock, and haymaking were excellent functional training in the fresh air. Children learned iron patience and perseverance by performing monotonous and heavy work from dawn to dusk. The land did not forgive weakness, so every movement had to be precise and effective. Girls kept up with the boys, processing wool, doing complex weaving, and cooking for large families. These activities required excellent fine motor skills, attention, and perseverance, but also considerable physical strength. Carrying heavy buckets of water every day and grinding grain by hand with heavy millstones was no easy task. All this made women's hands surprisingly strong, sturdy, and ready for any challenges of everyday life. Participating in the construction of sturdy houses and boats gave children a deep understanding of the properties of materials and engineering structures. They learned in practice how to work with wood, hard iron, and rough leather, mastering crafts for life. The ability to repair shoes or quickly patch clothes was as important on a voyage as sword fighting. Manual dexterity was valued no less than courage, because a tool broken at sea could cost the lives of the entire crew. Rowing occupied a special place in the life of a teenager, who was taught to row as soon as he could hold an oar firmly. Rowing a heavy dracker required the coordinated work of the entire crew and incredible physical endurance. This exercise developed powerful back muscles and taught young warriors to feel the overall rhythm and correct breathing. Hours spent rowing in saltwater tempered character better than any moralizing or empty talk. Working in a smithy, if one's father was a master craftsman, was considered elite strength training for any young man. Constant work with a heavy hammer developed explosive power and striking accuracy, which were deadly in hand-to-hand combat. The unbearable heat of the furnace and heavy metal tempered the body and spirit, making them as hard as high-quality steel. The forge was a place where physical power was combined with the ability to conceive and create great things. The entire life of a Scandinavian child was literally permeated with physical activity, which was natural and vital. They did not need to specifically build muscle in gyms because their bodies were shaped by real exertion. This did not result in inflated aesthetic beauty, but in real functional power, always ready for immediate use. Every muscle in their bodies had a practical purpose and had been tested by years of hard work.
Come on, we got this.
Labor also effectively taught responsibility, because if you didn't do your job, the whole family could be left without food or heat. This clear understanding of duty to loved ones was the most important element of social education in the community. A lazy person was sincerely despised by society and could never count on the sincere respect of neighbors or comrades. Usefulness to the clan was the main measure of a person's value from the moment of birth. Thus, the ordinary daily life of the Vikings was the best school of survival and comprehensive physical training in the world. Are you ready for the shocking truth about when Vikings received their very first real weapons? Unlike in our modern world, where dangerous weapons are carefully hidden from children, for the Scandinavians, they were an integral part of the interior. Children saw sharp swords, heavy axes, and long spears from birth, as they were always hung on the walls. Weapons lay on benches and were a source of pride, symbolizing freedom and readiness to defend one's home. Familiarity with combat weapons began long before a small child could even lift a real sword. At first, it was just silent observation of how the father carefully cared for and sharpened his blade. This fostered a respectful and careful attitude toward the instrument of war, which was considered almost a living being in the family. The child understood that a sword required attention and care, so that it would not let its owner down at the decisive moment of battle. The child could receive his first real knife as a gift at the age of 5 or 6, and it was not a toy. He had to be able to use it correctly in everyday life for a variety of needs, such as cutting strong ropes. Through constant everyday use, the child became aware of the danger of a sharp blade and learned to control its movements completely. The knife was the first step on the path to adult responsibility and the status of a real man. Training in combat techniques always began with light wooden weapons to avoid serious injuries in the early stages. Fathers and older brothers patiently demonstrated basic stances, correct strikes, and effective ways to defend oneself. The main thing was to teach the young man not just to swing a stick, but to move correctly, quickly get out of the line of attack, and keep his distance. Footwork was considered just as important as the strength of a blow with the hand, because in battle, mobility saves lives. Gradually, the total weight of the training weapons increased, eventually approaching the weight of a real combat blade. This allowed the ligaments and joints of the young body to be strengthened gradually, preparing them for the extreme stresses of real combat. By adolescence, a young man was already quite confident in wielding a heavy shield and a short axe or long spear. He learned not only to attack, but also to feel the balance of his weapons in different weather conditions.
Feel the balance here? Now hold
Mastering a heavy shield was the most crucial skill, as the Viking formation, known as the shield wall, was the basis of their tactics. Teenagers were taught to stand shoulder to shoulder, hold the formation firmly under heavy pressure, and always cover their comrades. This instilled in young people a sense of camaraderie and collective responsibility, without which it was simply impossible to survive in real combat. Unity in formation was much more important than the individual skill of each warrior. Archery was another extremely important skill that was diligently trained from childhood through regular hunting. The ability to accurately hit a moving target required excellent eyesight, a steady hand, and incredible endurance. The bow was considered a weapon not only for forest hunters, but also for professional warriors, especially during naval battles on ships. Long-range combat allowed the enemy's ranks to be thinned out before the drakers came alongside for boarding. Weapons were never forbidden fruit in Scandinavian families, so they never aroused unhealthy curiosity in children. From infancy, children knew that any sword was a huge responsibility and could only be drawn for serious reasons. Accidental minor injuries sometimes occurred, but they were always perceived as valuable and vivid lessons in caution. Fear of weapons was replaced by a deep understanding of their capabilities and the limits of acceptable behavior. By the time they reached the age of majority, weapons had become literally an extension of the young warrior's own arm. They no longer had to think long and hard about how to strike, as their bodies reacted to threats automatically. This skill, honed to perfection, saved lives in the chaos of bloody battle, where there was no time for long deliberation. Instincts absorbed since childhood transformed yesterday's teenager into a formidable and effective machine of war.
Shift your weight forward.
Weapons were a sacred symbol of a free man, and the right to carry them had to be earned and defended with dignity. Do you think it is right to entrust such dangerous objects to children from an early age under adult supervision? In the next chapter, you will learn why Vikings were never afraid of getting lost, even in the thickest and darkest forest. The ability to navigate dense forests and rugged mountains was as basic a skill for the Vikings as speaking or walking. Scandinavian nature is incredibly harsh and full of hidden dangers, so every child had to be able to find their way home in all weather conditions. The forest was not a scary place for them, but a huge storehouse of resources, as long as you knew how to use them properly. From childhood, Northerners were accustomed to looking at the world around them, through the eyes of an explorer and hunter. Children were diligently taught to read the tracks of various animals and determine the species, approximate size, and exact time of passage. This was vital not only for successful hunting, but also for basic safety, in order to avoid accidental encounters with dangerous predators. Constant attention to the smallest details, such as a broken branch or slightly flattened grass, was developed in young people on a daily basis. Any change in the familiar landscape could carry important information about what was happening around them.
You see it moving? Barely.
Orientation by the position of the sun, stars, the direction of moss growth, and wind strength was an essential part of northern education. They were well versed in all the folk signs of weather and could predict an approaching storm or heavy snowfall long before they actually began.
That is the pole star. It never moves.
This deep knowledge allowed warriors to find reliable shelter in time and not die of sudden hypothermia on the way. Nature constantly gave clues, and only those who knew how to notice them in time and decipher them correctly survived. The ability to quickly build a hot fire in a completely wet forest, in pouring rain or strong winds, was a critically important skill. Children knew very well which trees burned better than others, where to find dry kindling even in a swamp, and how to keep embers smoldering. Fire was synonymous with life for a Viking, and losing the precious opportunity to warm up on a hike meant almost certain death. The skill of handling a flint was valued as highly as the ability to shoot an arrow accurately or chop wood with an axe. Knowledge of all edible and poisonous plants was carefully passed down from older members of the clan to younger ones. From an early age, children knew how to find useful berries, mushrooms, nutritious roots, and medicinal herbs that could feed them or quickly cure them. The forest was both a huge pharmacy and a rich grocery store for them. All they had to do was be patient and careful to gather the gifts of the earth without harming themselves or those around them. They also learned in practice how to build reliable temporary shelters from branches, pine needles, and even dense snow, capable of protecting them from the worst weather. The ability to quickly organize a safe place to sleep could easily save a life if the hunt dragged on until dark or the weather suddenly deteriorated. This developed engineering thinking in teenagers and the important skill of using any available means to achieve a goal. Each such structure became a small fortress, protecting people from the cold and wild animals. Fishing was another reliable source of food, and children knew many different ways to catch fish. They knew how to set nets correctly, make traps, harpoon large fish, and fish with simple tackle. The river and the sea fed them all year round, but in return demanded respect and a deep knowledge of the habits of each species of fish. Boys and girls spent a lot of time by the water, studying the currents and the places where prey gathered. Hunting effectively taught children patience, the rare ability to sit completely still for hours, and masterful camouflage. The children learned to literally blend into the terrain, becoming completely invisible and silent to sensitive animals. These unique scouting skills were invaluable in future military campaigns on foreign lands. Those who knew how to sneak up on a deer could also sneak up on an enemy sentry. Their attitude towards their native nature was utilitarian, but at the same time very respectful, because they always took exactly as much as they needed at the moment. There was no place in their culture for the senseless destruction of animals or the cutting down of forests, as their common future depended on the preservation of these resources. From infancy, children understood that they were part of nature, not its absolute masters. All these skills made every Viking completely self-sufficient and able to survive on their own, even far from home.
Be careful with these berries, only the ones on the moss are safe.
Okay.
Viking society was far from chaotic. It always had a very clear structure and a strict social hierarchy. From an early age, every child firmly learned their rightful place in this system and the rules of behavior towards their elders. The authority of the recognized head of the family, the powerful Jarl or Supreme Konung, was absolutely unquestionable, and unquestioning obedience was considered the basis of order. Discipline permeated all spheres of life, from the hearth to the deck of a warship. The father's word was the highest law in the house, and it was completely unacceptable to argue with him or question his decisions. This effectively taught young people discipline and the ability to carry out complex orders accurately, which was vital in real combat situations. In the tight ranks of professional warriors, there was no room for unnecessary discussion or democracy. Instantaneous response to any command from the leader was required. Only in this way could they withstand the onslaught of the enemy and maintain the unity of the entire unit. Sincere respect for elders was based on their vast life experience and knowledge, which they gradually passed on to the young. The elders were the main guardians of ancient traditions and wisdom, so their advice was valued by all as if it were gold. Insulting an older person was considered a very serious offense and an indelible shame for the whole family. Young people understood that gray hair was a sign that a person had survived many battles and trials. However, this strict discipline was never like slavish obedience, because every free person had a developed sense of self-respect. Vikings highly valued personal freedom and their legal right to vote at the ting, or popular assembly. Children constantly saw adult men openly discussing the most important issues and making key decisions together. This taught them responsibility for their words and an understanding of how their society was governed. The concept of personal honor was central to the entire upbringing of the younger generation. For a Viking, losing face or being considered a coward in the eyes of the community was far worse than facing death.
This winter will be hard.
Children were taught to always keep their word, never lie to their fellow tribesmen, and be faithful to sacred oaths. Reputation was the main asset of any person, built up over many years and capable of being destroyed by a single dishonorable act. Various conflicts between children were often resolved by themselves, but always strictly within certain rules of conduct. Empty tattling was never encouraged in their environment, because everyone had to be able to stand up for themselves and their interests. At the same time, there were always clear boundaries that could not be crossed under any circumstances, so as not to provoke a long-lasting blood feud between clans. Self-control was as important a part of character as physical strength. At the same time, there were always clear boundaries that could not be crossed under any circumstances, so as not to provoke a long-lasting blood feud between clans. Self-control was as important a part of character as physical strength. Sacred hospitality was an unbreakable law for the Vikings, and children were taught from an early age to welcome all guests properly and with dignity. The ability to behave at the table, maintain conversation, and show sincere generosity was considered a sign of true nobility. These were their very first lessons in folk diplomacy and complex social etiquette. Every treat for a guest was an important ritual that strengthened ties between families and entire settlements. Punishments for any misdemeanors were severe, but always fair and understandable to the child. They knew exactly what they were being punished for, and this helped them quickly form the right cause and effect relationships. Physical punishment was the absolute norm at the time, but it was never the goal of education, only a means of correcting behavior. Children grew up understanding that every wrong action would inevitably be followed by deserved retribution. Sincere loyalty to their leader was instilled through heroic examples from ancient sagas and the personal devotion of senior warriors. Young people passionately dreamed of joining the retinue of a renowned warrior in the future and serving him faithfully until the very end. This helped to create incredibly close-knit combat brotherhoods capable of great achievements and distant discoveries. Personal loyalty to the leader was the glue that held together the entire power of the Scandinavian campaigns. Discipline among the Vikings was primarily internal, based on a deep understanding of the need for order for the survival of the entire people. How much do you think modern people lack such a clear and understandable system of values in education? In the next story, we will immerse ourselves in the world of great naval battles and learn how these principles help to win on the water. The sea was the Vikings' second home, and they became familiar with it at a very early age. Children grew up to the constant sound of the surf and exciting stories of distant lands lying far beyond the horizon. For them, a ship was not just a means of transportation, but a real home and a reliable fortress, a symbol of true freedom and wealth. From childhood, the sight of a drakkar on the water aroused awe in young northerners and a desire to climb aboard as soon as possible. The boys diligently studied the complex structure of the ship, actively helping adults in its repair and maintenance. They knew by heart the names of all the numerous rigging, sails, and every part of the wooden hull. The ability to tie strong nautical knots, diligently caulk the sides, and put reliable patches on holes was a mandatory skill. A child had to understand how each connection in the ship worked, because the ship's buoyancy in a storm depended on it. Navigation without a compass or paper maps was a real art that had been carefully passed down from father to son for centuries. Children learned to accurately determine their course by the sun, the North Star, the flight of birds, and even the changing color of the water. They memorized the smallest contours of the coastline and the exact location of islands, creating a detailed map of the world in their minds. A navigator's memory had to be flawless in order to find their way home through thick fog or the darkness of night. Behavior on board each ship was always subject to very strict and clear safety rules. Children knew exactly how to behave during a severe storm so as not to be accidentally washed overboard by a huge wave. Discipline on the ship was even stricter than on land, as the slightest mistake by one person could destroy the entire crew. Every sailor, even the youngest, was required to stay at his post and obey the leader's commands without question. The ability to predict the weather at sea was a matter of life and death for the Vikings. Constant observation of the shape of clouds, wind direction, and the strange behavior of marine animals allowed them to avoid disaster in time. This developed incredible intuition in children and a deep sense of complete unity with the mighty forces of nature. The ocean constantly sent signals, and a wise sailor knew how to hear its warnings long before the storm began. Working with sails required great physical strength, agility, and an intuitive understanding of the principles of aerodynamics from a warrior. Raising a heavy sail saturated with salt water or quickly removing it during a sudden squall was a task for real men. Teenagers learned to work as a team, performing all the necessary maneuvers as quickly and smoothly as possible. Synchronized actions were the key to speed, which allowed the Vikings to be the fastest pirates of their time. Living in constant cramped conditions on the open deck under the scorching sun or icy rain taught patience and adaptability. Weeks at sea without hot food in the biting wind and spray tempered the warrior's character to the limit. It was a real test of endurance that only the most resilient and strong-willed people could pass. Such conditions quickly weeded out the weak, leaving only those on board who were ready for any hardship for the sake of the common goal. Sea voyages were also an excellent school of international trade and communication with different peoples. Children learned in practice about the real value of overseas goods, foreign languages, and the unusual customs of distant strangers. This greatly broadened their horizons and taught them to quickly adapt to any new situation. Vikings were not only warriors, but also skilled diplomats who knew when to draw their swords and when to offer goods. A sincere love for the sea and an insatiable thirst for new discoveries were in the blood of every little Viking. They were never afraid of dangerous unknowns, but actively sought them out, driven by curiosity and a thirst for eternal glory.
Is worth 20 pelts. It is a fair price.
The ship gave them a unique opportunity to completely change their destiny and rise from poverty to the heights of power. For them, the horizon was not a barrier, but a challenge to be accepted with pride. Maritime science made them true citizens of the world, for whom there were practically no insurmountable boundaries. The childhood of Vikings ended very early, usually at the age of 12 or 14. The transition to adulthood was never a formality. It was a harsh and honest test of complete maturity. The teenager had to prove to the entire community that he was ready to take full responsibility for himself and his great family. This moment determined the rest of a person's life and his status among his tribesmen. This important event was often accompanied by the ceremonial presentation of adult weapons or participation in the first real military campaign. Receiving a sword from the hands of his father was a powerful symbolic act of recognizing his son as an equal among men. From that moment on, the young man became a full member of society and could claim his share of the spoils. The weapon in his hands was a sign that he was now a defender, not someone who needed to be defended.
The harvest must be stored properly this
Girls
week.
also went through an important stage of growing up, becoming full-fledged housewives and keepers of heavy bunches of keys. They were entrusted with the complete management of complex households and given a voice in the discussion of women's affairs in the community. Marriage in those days was often arranged very early and was primarily a union between two influential families. Such a union imposed new and serious obligations on the young woman to maintain peace and prosperity in the family. Adult status meant not only new rights for a person, but also serious responsibilities before the law and the entire community. Now a young man could be called to account at a public meeting for any of his rash actions. He was obliged to know the laws of his land perfectly and be able to firmly defend his rights in court. Adulthood required him to be able to speak reasonably and be accountable for every word he uttered in front of his elders. The first killing of a dangerous enemy or a very large animal in the forest often became a point of no return for a young man. It was a kind of baptism of blood that finally and forever separated a man from a little boy. Society officially recognized him as a full-fledged warrior, capable of effectively defending his home and family honor. After such a feat, no one dared to doubt his courage and right to call himself a true northerner. Complete independence has always been the main and most important goal of the entire Scandinavian upbringing process. Parents were sincerely proud of those children who could live by their own minds and provide for themselves independently. The ability to make difficult decisions quickly and take responsibility for their consequences was the main sign of human maturity. Immaturity and blind dependence on other people were deeply despised and considered a sign of weak character.
There lies our destiny. Prepare the longship.
Sincere
We sail
respect
with the
from
tide.
peers and reverence from elders had to be earned daily through real deeds. Young people strove with all their might to prove themselves in dangerous raids, profitable trade, or complex crafts. It was a time of very active self-assertion and a constant search for one's rightful place under the sun. Everyone wanted to leave a mark on the history of their clan and earn a mention in future heroic songs and sagas. The strong bond with the family was never completely broken, but it moved to a whole new level of equal partnership. Adult children eventually became a reliable support for their aging parents, ensuring the eternal continuity of generations. The clan continued to live and prosper precisely because of the strength, energy, and discipline of the new youth. Respect for ancestors was combined with a desire to surpass them in glory and wealth. Thus, the full cycle of education was successfully completed, creating a person ready for any harsh challenges of their turbulent era. These people, raised in constant harshness and iron discipline, created a great culture that still sincerely amazes the whole world. They were the perfect product of their time and the most perfect tools for survival in extreme conditions. Their will to live was stronger than the ice and storms that surrounded them from birth. This path to adulthood was very short, but incredibly intense, harsh, and truly effective. Would you like me to help you prepare the final part of the script or add some more details about the everyday life of the Vikings?
The lines must be straight if the carving is to have power.
The story of Viking child rearing is not just a tale of the past, it is a lesson in human potential. we have seen how harsh conditions and strict discipline shaped a generation of indomitable warriors and sailors. Their methods may seem cruel to us, but they were dictated by the logic of survival in a world where there was no room for weakness. They taught their children not to avoid difficulties, but to face them head-on, turning obstacles into stepping stones to glory. This philosophy of strength, honor, and fatalism allowed them to conquer the seas and leave an indelible mark on history. Perhaps we have something to learn from them in terms of resilience and staying true to our principles. What aspects of Viking upbringing did you find most surprising or useful? Would you like to see a video about the lives of women of that era or the secrets of their shipbuilding? Write your suggestions in the comments and subscribe to the channel to continue your journey into the past.